Hello, viewers and students. Welcome to iTeaches. Today, we are going to learn a very interesting topic, that is, how you can add method dynamically to an object or class. I have created these tutorials into three sections. You observe all these three sections very carefully, and I hope at the end the idea about this topic will be clear to you. And if you like this particular tutorial, then please like, subscribe, share, and definitely comment. So let's start our code. So in this, I'm using the IDLE. This is my editor. This is the default Python editor. And in this default Python editor, you can see that I have written one class. The name of the class I have taken as student. Inside the students class, we are having one constructor. So I'm not going to discuss more about the constructor in this particular video because our main concern is not this. We are talking about how you can add a method dynamically in Python. So that's why it is not our concern right now. So outside this particular student function, you can see that we have another function which is a def display. So now when you have this display function, so this display function is just an ordinary function. It is not belongs to this particular class student. All right. So inside this display function, we have a general statement, a simple message, hello world. So whenever we call this definition, this function definition, we are going to get an output as hello world. So to check it out, let's see. We write here display, the name of the function itself, and the bracket open, bracket close, which is the parenthesis. So this is going to call this function definition. Now let's run this program. So we click on run, and this. Okay. Now as you can see over here, this hello world you can see as an output. It is obvious that we are going to call this function and you are getting this output. Now what if I want to call this particular display function using the object of the class? Alright, so if I try to do this, whether I'm going to get the same output as hello world or not, let's check it out. So first of all, to call this particular function, we need to create an object of this particular class. So suppose I'm creating an object, so I'm writing a command over here, create an object, create an object. So I'm creating an object right now for this particular class. So for that I need to give the name of the object. You can give any name to the object. So I'm giving here obj, and then we will going to call the constructor of the class student. So as we know that the name of the constructor and name of the class are same, so that's why basically we write here the name as a student itself. And in the constructor, if you see that I have two parameters, one is self, another one is rn. So this is the self is actually the value for the self will be provided by the Python itself. It is referred to the current object, and rn is the value that we are going to pass when we create an object. So here suppose I am passing the value, for example 10. So this 10 will go over here in rn, and this rn is ultimately going to store inside this attribute of the object, the current object, which is obj. So this 10 is going to store inside this roll number, or I mean roll. Now what happened, I have an object with me. Now let's try whether if I try to call this display function and display function work or not. So obj dot display. Now when you do this, let's check it out. When you do this, whether we are going to get the output or not. So just run the program. As you can see, we'll generate an error. This is hello is because of this first statement, this display. And after that, when you try to call the display using an object, it is getting an error. Why it is generating an error? Because see the type of error it is. It is an attribute error. Attribute error means this particular display function is an ordinary function, as I already mentioned. This is not belongs to this particular class. So as this is not a member function, it is not available to any of the object of this particular class. So as it is not available to this particular object, so the object cannot call it. But we are forcing of this statement that we are trying to call this function. So let's see what happened. The result is in front of you, that the student object has no attribute display. So here we'll generate an error. So what we can do to resolve this issue? So we can do one thing. We can store the reference of this particular display function inside any of the attribute. We can create an attribute dynamically right now here also for this object, and we are storing this reference of this display function inside that attribute, and then we can call. Now to do this one, after creation of the object, you have to do one more thing here. Obj now dot, and now you can write down any attribute where you want to store the reference of the display function. So here I'm keeping the same name for the simplicity, display. I'm just keeping it simple, display, and now I'm going to store the attribute, the reference of the display function. So display. So remember, this display is the reference of this particular function, whereas this is the placeholder where we are going to store, means this particular display is going to refer to this display function. All right. So now what happened over here, that as we have stored the reference inside this, now the next line when you try to call it also, now let's see what will happen, whether we are going to get the same hello world answer or not. Again we are going to run the module. Okay, here now let's see. Earlier what happened, it generates an error, attribution error, because obviously this display not belongs to this particular class. But here, after storing the reference of this particular object, a particular function into this display, we are going to get a output as hello world. Why? Because we are storing a reference and we are calling the reference. But it is 100% true that this particular display function is not yet bounded with this particular object, nor it is the part of the class. It is only the reference that we are storing inside an attribute of an object, and using that reference only we are calling the function. So because of that only we are going to get this result. So this is our first section where we have discussed about how you can call a function, an ordinary function, by the reference of that function stored inside an object reference, and then we can make a call. So in section 2 we are going to see that how we can access a object attribute inside a non-data member function. So for that I'm going to create a non-data member function, as we have already created a display function in the section 1. The same function I'm going to create here again as def display, and then here I'm including self. In earlier section 1 example I have not included this self, but in this I'm going to see that whether we can access the attribute or the property of a object or not inside a non-member function. So for this I have written it as this self. Now inside that I have written this print, and then I mention here, suppose I want to access this roll number, so I write here roll number, and then self dot roll. Just a second, here I have to give one double inverted comma. All right, so this is our non-member function, but we are trying to access attribute of a object. So whether it is possible or not, let's check it out. So now I'm going to create an object of this class student. So it will be same as the previous example, that is obj student, and then I'm passing a value, let it be again 10. Now I'm going to call this function obj dot display. Now let's check it out whether this has produced any result or an error. So run and run the module. Now as soon as we run the module, you can see the same error, that is attribution error, because this particular display function not belongs to the class, so that's why it is obvious that it is going to throw an error. Now what we can do over here, we can just do the same picture that we have created in the section 1. Like that only I'm going to refer this display function, refer the display function to a particular variable. Now check it out whether still, if you do like this way, still whether we are able to access the self or not. So to do this, now again you see the same error. This time you're getting this error, that is type error, display missing one required positional argument self. It is quite obvious that it is treating self as a variable, not a keyword. It is treated as a variable and it demands some kind of value need to be passed over here in this particular function. But as we know that this is a self which is going to refer a particular invoking object, so it is not ordinary parameter variable, rather this value usually provided by the Python itself when this method is the part of a particular class. But here, as it is a non-member function, so it is quite obvious this self will be treated as a parameter variable. But so this way it is quite sure that it is not possible to access this kind of self variable. So to resolve this issue, there is another way. So the another way that I'm going to discuss, I just remove this particular part and over here I'm writing obj dot display, and here I'm using a special function called method type, and this method type function basically requires two parameters. One is the display function over here, this display function, the name of this function, and the object that we are going to bind with this particular function. So here in our case it is display is the function, whereas the object is the this particular object which we want to bind with this particular display. Now we will going to see this whether it is going to work or not. Now before we proceed for execution, I'll tell you one more thing over here, that this particular method type belongs to a specific module, and that module we need to import over here before we execute. So I'm writing it over here from types. Types is that module from where we are going to use this method type. All right. Now what this method type will do, this method type will actually binds the method to the instance. Instance means the object. So it binds the method, that is the display function, with the instance, and it is going to create a bound method. It's going to create a bound method. So now our work is done. We have, using this line, we have already created a bound method, that is displays get associated or bound with this particular object. Now if I try to access it, now see whether we will going to get or refer, or we can say access this particular roll number of this invoking object or not. So let's run this code. So click on run and then run. Alright, I'm sorry, it's an invalid syntax. Here I have to include one more thing, import. I have to write here from types, I have to import the method type. Alright, so again we run it and click on run. Okay, now see, this is our result. Our previous error is this, and this is our present result. So this means that the particular object, which is obj, is now bind with the display function. So as it is get binded with the display function, inside the display function we can easily access all the attributes of this particular object. So here we have roll number, so we are easily access this roll number. Now moving forward, one important thing to understand over here, this example that I have shown you, here we have bind one object, which is obj, with the display only. Now if we try to create other object of the same class which is not binded with this display, so again the same thing will happen. Those object will not going to be not going to refer or not going to get this particular facility. That means the display function will not provide their attribute values. Now to understand this, let's start. Suppose I create here one more object, so I give the name as obj1 is equal to student. This time I'm passing the value 20, and then with obj1 I'm going to call display. Now observe this, that display function is not binded with this obj1, it's not binded. Now if I'm going to call also, but this is definitely it will be an attribute error, but just this is to show you that whether it is actually working or not. So to do this one, let's run again. See, exactly the same thing happened here. That is, the roll number which is associated with obj is actually accessible inside this display function, but whereas if I use this particular obj1 that we have created having value 20, it is not available inside this display functions. Rather, it generates an error which is attribute error, similar error that we have already got when this particular object is not associated with display or binded with display. So it is, I think the idea is clear to you, that it is this method type function is only going to bind a particular function with a particular object. It is not for all the objects. All right. So in the next section we will see that how to overcome this issue also, like how a particular member function, non-member function become a member function, and other objects, no matter how many objects we are going to create for that particular class, they can easily access, and the self keyword can be used inside that particular display or any kind of function. So stay tuned and wait for the section 3. So in section 3, we are trying to overcome the problem which we face in our section 2, where we are able to associate only one object with a particular non-member function. But if we want to associate multiple objects of the class with the particular functions, then we have already faced a problem in the previous sections. Now we have to overcome this. So how we are going to overcome it, let's see over here. So for this purpose, what we can do is we can add this method, this display method, in the class body. So once we are able to add it, then it is quite obvious that it is available to all the object of the class. So what we can do it over here, we will add one line of code, which is this, that is student, that is the name of the class, dot display, and associate the function with this. So by adding this line of code, what we are doing, we are adding the method to the class. All right. Now as we know that by adding the method to a class, so this particular method is associated in the body of the class. As a result, it is available to all the object of the class. All right, it is available to all the object of the class, and we can easily refer to this particular display function and use the self keyword, and we can easily access all the attribute variables inside this particular function for all the objects. Now let's see what we can do over here. Now I'm just creating an object, obj is equal to student. This time I'm just using the same one only, student 10. I'm passing for the first part, and then in the next one I'm passing here obj1 is equal to student 20. So one value I am passing for obj is 10, and for obj1 the roll number, the roll value will be 20. So I hope that when we are going to call, as we have already made this display function associated with the class, so I'm hoping that this obj and obj1 is going to access this display function, as well as we are going to get the roll numbers. So after this, one by one we are going to call obj dot display, All right, so obj.display, I'm calling the display with an obj variable. So here I'm expecting the answer will be roll number 10, and another one is obj1 dot display, and here I'm expecting the answer will be 20. All right, so let's check it out. So I'm going to run this program. So first click on run and then run the module. Okay, now exactly this happened. So as you can see, the first we have called obj display, and as we have stored 10 inside the attribute variable, that is a roll number, that is a roll for obj, and obj1 we have stored the roll number as roll number value as 20. So as a result, when we call these two functions like display once, and for obj1 is calling display again, so for these two different calls, it generates two different values. One is 10, another one is 20. The 10 is for the first object and 20 is for the second object. Now, using this particular example, you can understand that how you can associate a particular non-member functions within a class, and no matter how many objects you are creating, every object can access this particular function. And inside the moreover, the important thing is inside this function you can you can easily access the attribute variables of specific objects, the object which is going to invoke the function. So the viewers and the students, I hope you understand today's lesson. I have divided this lesson into 3 sections for the simplicity, so that you can understand a new thing in every section. So I hope you like it, and if you like this particular tutorial on how you can add method dynamically to an object or class, then please like, share, subscribe, and of course give your valuable comments. Thank you, and keep watching iTeaches.